We are back. This is the Split
We're
Take
live.
podcast
Mm.
of sorts. I'm your host, Jacob.
I'm your other host, Chandler.
And today is a very special day. We're going to be talking about John Cassavetes, the director.
Tell about the time you punched Stanley Kramer in the nose. Talk about tension. No,
There are, 3 Cassavetes films on the BFI Sight and Sound list, and they are opening night.
4.
Oh, 4. Opening night, Killing of a Chinese Bookie, Husbands, and A Woman Under the Influence. We have reviewed all of them except for A Woman Under the Influence. So today we're going to be talking about that and taking the opportunity to just kind of talk about Cassavetes in general and his style as a director, because he is certainly one of the most interesting directors to discuss, whether you like him or not.
Money has nothing to do with the film, and I think it really, in the end, kills you from being creative and from inventing. Finding a way to do it makes you think.
There's a lot to kind of unpack, and I think we will not finish unpacking today, but we have started that process of coming to terms with Cassavetes as a director.
We're coping.
Before we get to that, coping. It is coping. Stockholm syndrome. A whole variety of terms could be used for how we've responded.
Cassavetes pilled, we'll say.
I suppose he's a director that needs some introduction because he is, for those who know, very infamous. Cassavetes, but I feel like for the most part, most moviegoers don't know Cassavetes.
No,
aren't intimately familiar with his work.
He's like your favorite director's favorite director. I feel he's kind of. I would say, A Woman Under the Influence is the closest he's come to like widespread acclaim. Everything else is sort of like buried.
People probably are more familiar with him as an actor than they are.
Yeah.
I just would have to guess that something like Rosemary's Baby has been far more widely seen than any Cassavetes film.
Dirty Dozen.
In that. He's in Dirty Dozen. He's in a couple TV shows. He's in Columbo.
He is in Columbo. Yep.
I'm very excited for that episode. So yeah, and I, to be fair, I saw him as a actor first, long before I ever got into watching any of his movies.
See, I went straight as a director. I still haven't seen Rosemary's Baby. I watched The Dirty Dozen after I became familiar with him, and I can't even think of anything else he's been in. I love the clip of him punching Ronald Reagan, though. That is funny.
There's what?
Just like a TV show he did in the 50s. It was, I don't know what TV show it was, but Ronald Reagan played the villain on that episode. There's a scene where John Cassavetes punches Ronald Reagan in the face.
Well, I can change that in a hurry.
That's marvelous. Absolutely great.
That's based.
One of my favorite quotes from Cassavetes. Cassavetes is a very decisive director, and despite the fact that his films have never reached a wider audience perception, he is very much well known within the industry, particularly within independent filmmaking, because he's often considered to be like the founding father or the innovative father of the American independent movement, particularly in the 60s and 70s.
It's important to note, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it's also important to note as well that the term independent film, at this point, it's almost like become a genre more than an actual movement. But like when you think independent, people think small budget outside of the studio system. John Cassavetes was like, he mortgaged his house every time he wanted to make a movie.
Occasionally he would make studio projects.
Yeah.
And it's very funny reading quotes by him talking about his studio projects, about how they made him depressed and he hates them, and selling his soul to Hollywood and all that
for like not great movies either. Those are the only stretch of Cassavetes movies I haven't seen. Is the late 50s, early 60s, like 2-3 picture deal, one with Burt Lancaster, one about a jazz musician. I haven't seen them yet. I don't plan on to anytime soon. But yeah.
But Yeah, so he's a very divisive filmmaker, both in terms of how he was directing. It's almost, his style is almost immediately recognizable. It has, I don't think, ever really been replicated to the full extent, although it has been, parts of it have been copied and pasted and have inspired other directors. But nothing is quite like a Cassavetes film. But outside of his movies, he was a very a vocal contrarian. And when I say contrarian, I say that lovingly, sort of. I don't mean it in terms of like he was just doing it for like performative or anything like that. He genuinely believed in everything he was talking about. And he was a filmmaking philosopher.
I don't think a person can live without a philosophy. What is philosophy? Philos in Greek means friend or love. Love and friend is synonymous. And the study is any aphi is the study of. So it's a study of love. And to have a philosophy is to know how to love and to know where to put it. Because you can't put it everywhere. You walk around, you got to be a minister or a priest saying, yes, my son, or yes, my daughter, bless you. But people don't live that way.
He had his own ideas about the way that film should work and the way that you should interact with actors and the way that narrative should be presented. And a lot of these ideas are very anti-Hollywood, if not explicitly, implicitly. And one of my favorite quotes from him, just to give you an example of how just divisive he could be and very like opinionated. He was an extremely opinionated individual. And one of my favorite quotes is kind of offhandedly in an interview, he said, every young filmmaker is a closet communist.
Yeah.
How could you make such a blanket statement? But it's just something he just did. Just puts it out there, and that's what he's here to do. And you know, is someone who never really compromised, at least when it mattered.
No. Yeah. So this is the fourth film that we've discussed, and there's been an interesting trajectory. I feel
A Woman Under the Influence.
Yeah, A Woman Under the Influence.
I always understood you, and you always understood me, and that was always just how it was, and that's it. Till death do us part, Nick, you said it. Remember, he said, do you, Mabel Mortensen, take this man? I do, Nick. I do. Remember, I said, it's gonna work because I'm already pregnant.
Don't let that mind run away on you now.
Because the first one we watched, I believe, was Chinese Bookie. And straight from the get-go, I was interested but confused. And the more and more films that we watched, the more I was just like, what is it about this guy? What I wanted to understand the essence of him, because he is so different. There is very few imitators or people who tried to imitate that style, because there really wasn't one. But he's just one of those people that I was very interested in. So I went ahead and bought this big book that I don't have with me. It's at my work or whatever, called Cassavetes on Cassavetes, which is just a collection of interviews that he did, and the biographer sort of weaves like biographical information between these interviews or whatever. And it just, I've been reading it over the past like 2 or 3 months, and I think I've like come to start to understand why I like him, but I'm morally torn here, because I'm thinking to myself, because I've revisited a bunch of his movies over the past like month, and I've liked them a lot more than I did when we initially watched them. I'm thinking to myself, okay, is it because I read the book and now I'm biased? But at the same time, I'm like, I only read the book because those first few times I watched the movies interested me so much that I wanted to learn more about them. I wanted to understand them deeper. So you could say that I did my homework, but we'll go through the other films later. But we could just start with A Woman Under the Influence, because I feel after learning as much as I did about Cassavetes, that this film is still like the best. It's him at his best. His style, his fixations, everything about him, I think, is just perfect in this movie.
Yeah,
the other movies have moments that kind of piss me off, that are kind of annoying, but this movie, as chaotic and unclean as it is, I think from like beginning to end is just perfect for me.
Yeah, we're definitely going to get into his quirks as a director and how they work in some places, and depending on how you feel about them, don't work in other places or do work. But with Cassavetes, I don't know. So I know I've brought this up on the podcast before. First time I ever watched a Cassavetes film was Shadows for a independent filmmaking class in college. A lot of people, that was their first interaction. Didn't really touch him again until 2 years later in college, when another teacher showed a scene from A Woman Under the Influence. It's probably the most famous and probably the best scene in the film.
Which one?
We just watched that. The Gena Rowlands breakdown. It's the central set piece of the film when the doctor comes over. So our teacher showed us this, and we talked a bit about the independent filmmaking techniques that were being used, like the kind of freeform camera that he has, the audio, the actors, not caring whether or not the actors are in focus or not, just staying with them, and all that kind of stuff. And so those were my two interactions with him in college. And I don't really know when, but I kind of filled in a little bit more here and there. I watched Opening Night, which very famously I hate. I think it's terrible. Awful film. Thank you. Good night.
I don't, for the record.
And then I think that was the only one that I had really checked out in the intervening years. So it was Shadows, Woman Under the Influence, and Opening Night. And then that brings us to the podcast when, unlike you, I was never interested in Cassavetes as a director. Like I found Woman Under the Influence to be great movie. But I found Shadows and Opening Night to be just kind of there. And they had nothing for me. And so I just kind of ignored him. And then over the course of this podcast, I've oscillated between sheer frustration to optimistic approaching his work from a more optimistic point. And so I don't know, constantly evolving on the subject of John Cassavetes. But the one thing that remains constant is, of course, my love for A Woman Under the Influence, which is, I think, by far, maybe not by far, but it's his best work, at least for me.
Yeah. I want to see Love Streams again, but I as of right now, I would say that's definitely number one.
It's his most kind of like contained film, in a way that's good. Because oftentimes I think some of the movies, some of the ways he directs get too contained and too wrapped up in their own neuroses or their own characters, whatever. And it becomes a little too obtuse for its own good. But this is the movie that I think rides the line of what Cassavetes' style is doing, what he's trying to accomplish, without becoming annoying or off-putting to the audience. It is interesting that this is the film I would describe as being the most approachable from Cassavetes.
And it's still not approachable at all.
But unlike other directors where you have other directors who are kind of avant-garde, but they've created kind of more mainstream pictures. That's not the case here. This is not any kind of a sellout, more Hollywood-esque movie from Cassavetes. This is very much his style. There's no compromising here. And yet it is still his most approachable. And I think for that reason, because the rest of his style is so polarizing, that's what makes part of the reason why that makes this the best one. Because you can show it to anyone, and if they're interested, they can go down the rabbit hole of the rest of his filmography.
Yeah. Well, it also the best one because I think it has the most complex and interesting characters. Just to give a brief plot description of what this movie is. It's about Nick and Mabel Longhetti. Nick is a construction worker, longshoreman, something. I'm not sure.
I promised her on my life I'd be home tonight. I promised her that this night was going to be a love night, a special night, something. I didn't know this goddamn thing was going to happen.
Municipal construction worker for Los Angeles, I think is what the description said.
And yeah, he played by Peter Falk. His wife, Mabel Longhetti, Gena Rowlands, is the stay-at-home mother with a bit of a quirky personality, to put it lightly.
Mama. Don't call me Ma, Nick. My name is Mabel. I don't like to be called Ma.
Well, come over here anyway.
No, they've got to go to school.
Come over here anyway. All right, kids, back in bed.
She suffers from some sort of mental illness. They never go into it.
It's never clear enough that you could pin it down specifically. Like, I don't think Cassavetes wrote her character with any specific illness in mind.
Yeah.
Which I think makes it interesting because you can kind of like
approach
it in your own way.
Yeah. Because to me, it was never really about there's just so much to these actors' performances that you kind of like start thinking about the history. You kind of feel that these characters existed before the movie existed and they lived long after. So the whole time I was thinking, okay, was it a case where like Nick fell in love with Mabel and then later into their marriage she developed this sort of like a mental disorder? Has she always had it? Has he just sort of swept it under the rug? I don't know. But it's 2.5 hours. I got the
feeling from this viewing that it was always there to a certain extent, and that's one of the reasons. At least her quirkiness is one of the reasons why Nick loves her, not necessarily the more out there wild nature expressions of it, though.
Because he does, I don't know. This movie could so easily just be like Nick wants to fix her and can't put up with her. And just is embarrassed by her, whatever. And obviously he is embarrassed at points to an extent. But my favorite scene in the movie is the scene where all the workers leave and it's just Nick and Mabel across the dinner table from each other. And Mabel's desperately trying to figure out what she did wrong. And Nick's like saying, you didn't do anything wrong. You took it a little too far. But she doesn't know what it is.
Hey. Right.
I was trying to be nice.
Wacko.
I like your friends.
I know it.
And it's just great watching these two go at it. I love Peter Falk in this. Obviously, Gena Rowlands is great. And I'll be honest, she's one of my favorite actors at this point. After rewatching everything, I think the one constant in Cassavetes' filmography is that every time she's on screen, she's great. I know you finally watched Faces. I think she's great in Faces as well.
One of the things with Cassavetes' characters is that the way he approaches characters and writing is very much kind of both actor focused, but also very kind of writing focused, because there's a myth that his films are improvised and all that, but they're not in any way. There are occasionally instances where actors would be like, well, I think my character would do this, but only like small instances of that, and not necessarily lines of dialogue being changed.
Yeah.
So a lot of these characters are being thought up inside of Cassavetes' mind, and then there's a lot of workshopping that goes on to figure out the expression of those characters. And in that process, I think there is a tendency. I don't know where it comes from. It has to come from Cassavetes, but since the actors are so involved and not involved in a weird way, I also might put it there. It's that they get so interested in the idea of the character, who the character is, and just being in the scene, that the being in the scene becomes a goal in and of itself, rather than making a interesting scene.
They don't have direction. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. No, like, it's so like contradictory. Like, there's so much direction going on, and yet there's not enough. And this is the film that I can point to saying, this is where like the character creation process feels like it was towards something, some purpose and point. And even when some of the scene, like occasionally in here in A Woman Under the Influence, there are moments where it's like, they're just kind of talking about stuff. Stuff is happening, and it's not directly related to, I don't want to say plot, because it doesn't need to be for it to be problematic. but about character. Because like there's a way to have an actor be in character on screen, but it's not adding to the character, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think Cassavetes, that would be like my main complaint with him, is that so often I get really great performances, really invested characters, but very like often just devolving into non-character revealing scenarios. For sure, it could be interesting, but the scenario itself doesn't actually illuminate anything about the character, the plot, the narrative, whatever. This is not the case in Oh and Under the Influence. And even when it seems tangential, or it seems just purely conversational, which is a lot of Cassavetes' writing, it all ultimately builds up. And I think out of every single one of his movies, the subjects and themes he's trying to get at, like the middle class malaise and loving relationships and stuff like that, it all builds
marital
towards something.
roles, stuff
and
like that.
The final scene of the film is just like you can finally get to like breathe after this roller coaster of emotions. And like more so than any other, maybe the exception of Faces, maybe that's the exception, but I just get to the ending of A Woman Under the Influence and I feel like, wow, that is a movie that revealed character and had something interesting to say and explore without being like condescending or pedantic, without like going into Hollywood tropes or narrative or anything like that. And it's beautiful.
It's completely absent of tropes, any kind of trope. Because like when you try to explain what happens in this movie, it's a relatively simply plotted movie. Not a lot happens, but it's just he gives these actors so much room to allow this nothing to happen. And I'm just going to go into the process here, because we talked about how there's no improvisation. He sort of adopts I don't want to say adopts because he came later, but it's a pseudo Mike Leigh method where he gets the actors, they workshop characters. He writes these characters, he writes what they're going to do. They rehearse a bunch or whatever. And then, he sort of changes as they go. Oh no, that's not true. He actually didn't like rehearsing. He gave the actors very little in terms of direction, like what to do.
From what
he had lines.
Yeah, from what I gathered, like there would be not necessarily rehearsals, but they would do just reads. Scenarios in character. Yeah. But very rarely like interact with the material of the script itself until it was time to just put it all out there in front of the camera.
Yeah. He was very meticulous in his writing, but I think what makes it strange in a good way is that you never you listen to these lines and you're not thinking the reason it sounds improvised is because he talks in a pseudo way that people talk, a lot of his characters. He's very emotion driven, and you can tell that a lot of times his characters don't necessarily know how to put their emotions into words, much like most people do. I think I see like Nick and I see Mabel, and I can understand what they're feeling and what they're trying to say, but the way that it comes out of their mouths, it's not graceful. It just sort of, they have so much to say, but their mouth will only let out so many words. I think that's really great, especially in this movie. But going through this book as well, it's clear that he, as much as he didn't like improvisation and stuff like that, he wasn't afraid to try things when actual filming. One of my favorite stories, I think it's on the Woman Under the Influence supplements, but it was one of the first scenes that he shot with Peter Falk at the construction site. It's him in a car talking to someone else after like Mabel had like a breakdown or whatever. Or no, it's earlier on in the film. Doesn't matter. Peter Falk's in the car talking to someone else. And right before the film, they're beginning to shoot, with all these lights and setups or whatever, John comes running onto the set saying, stop, wait, stop. And he puts on the hat. He gives
big floppy hat for Peter Falk.
Big floppy hat, which is just beautiful. And Peter Falk was just like, so much of that character was in that hat at that moment. Again, talking about his style, when you mentioned it earlier, the longer lenses, the not caring about actors being in focus, the sort of like gliding improvisational feel of the camera work, I feel like nowadays that sort of style is taught and emphasize that that's like a matter of budget, because obviously setups cost time and money. Yeah. But it's weird because Cassavetes didn't do it for budget. Cassavetes shot so much fucking film. He shot like 10 times the average amount of film footage than the average movie. But the reason that he had the camera work like that is because he wanted long lenses so the cameras would not be in the actors' faces.
Right.
He just wanted them way back there, not disrupting the scene.
To clarify, like he didn't necessarily have the money to shoot all that film. Like it wasn't because he had all this film to play with. But he was like cutting costs a lot in other areas of just having casting friends in roles and
it takes place in his house.
Yeah, using his house, using friends as the crew and all that. So there's a lot of cost cutting measures, but it never was at the expense of the camera and the actors.
And well, you get the feeling again watching all these movies like back to back. The same like fucking 10 people are in all of his movies. The guy in Faces with the mustache, who like for the first half he's with Gena Rowlands and the husband. He's in like every movie. I don't remember his name.
Yeah, I don't know why I can't remember his name now. But yeah, Seymour Cassel is a big
Seymour
one.
Cassel. He's in this movie.
Peter Falk.
No, he's in Opening Night. Peter Falk,
obviously.
Ben Gazzara, Gena Rowlands, everyone. The guy who plays the doctor who checks out Mabel, he's in Opening Night for like a scene. But the actors loved working with them because they were free. They got to do whatever they wanted. They weren't limited by scripts or productions or whatever.
They got to do whatever they wanted in terms of the space. They got to live in the space of the film, and they didn't get to just improvise their lines, but they did their actions. Like the acting came from gestures and physicality of walking, being able to explore the set and do whatever you want while remaining within the script that Cassavetes had written.
And another way that he cut costs, especially on this movie, is that famously he hired a bunch of like AFI students. And the first few scenes that he shot with this young kid, this DP kid at AFI studying cinematography, who had like 3 or 4 grips come with him. And within like a day, he fired him and the whole crew because the kids, all they wanted to do is they wanted to put the camera on the tripod and they wanted to spend like 3 hours fucking with the lighting. And Cassavetes is like, no, I don't want to do that. That takes forever. We're not here to make it look nice or whatever. So he got like the most inexperienced kids he could find, just anyone who would be willing to work, who wanted to be on a movie set, and put him in and just said, didn't give him any instruction, just gave him the camera and said, you focus on Gena, you focus on Peter. And oftentimes he would take a camera as well, shooting the masters or whatever. He was very hands-on. But the thing is, there are some of his movies where that style you can plainly see. You're like, okay, you had no plan here. But I think in this movie in particular, it looks really good. Like it's improvisational and the focus comes in and out. But I still think the movie as a whole, like it looks great.
Yeah. This one in particular, one of the things I really disagree with Cassavetes on, like I cannot disagree more with him. The visual language of cinema is what makes cinema. And I feel like Cassavetes, who had kind of a background in theater, what?
I'm saying, I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, but like
he did not.
Cassavetes came from sort of like a theater experience and wanting to be an actor and all that kind of stuff. And so that was his perspective, where he was coming from. And, I think it's fairly obvious that like the evolution of cinema as an art is a visual medium.
Yeah.
And it, theater is the domain of acting, really. I mean, at least that's if we're being really reductionist about it. And I'm not saying film isn't. Film is.
Yeah.
But it is, you have films like 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is the most actor unfriendly. Like there's no, there are characters, there are actors in it, but it is the film. The way the film
most
works,
memorable character is a fucking computer.
Yeah. And the way everyone latches onto that film because of the music and the visuals and stuff. And the thing about film is that you are telling a story visually. That is what the camera is for, a visual representation of reality. And I disagree fundamentally on Cassavetes' unwillingness to interact with that part of cinema.
My God, it's so funny.
But I respect him for doing it because I'm happy there's someone out there that was willing to be so like single-minded in exploring one aspect of filmmaking. I disagree with him philosophically, but not in practice. Like I'm happy that this is a sort of cinematic experiment. And even Cassavetes described a lot of, especially his earlier work, like Shadows, as experiments, more so than actual films. And even in like, I think A Woman Under the Influence and Husbands are the two that I can like point out, or like there's some genuinely good cinematography in there, despite Cassavetes' best intentions. And those are moments where I'm like, I could feel more of the world, not just the actors.
I would say Chinese Bookie as well. I feel.
Oh yeah. I forget. I can't remember all of them at once. They all run together at some point. But there's, in Woman Under the Influence, you have the shots early on with Nick working late at night and the workers and the water and everything going on in downtown LA.
In that little bar, everybody's all dusty and dirty.
Yeah. It's good cinematography. It's good stuff, especially like there's a lot of fun shots.
It's not flashy, but it's good.
Yeah. I'm now thinking after finishing Faces that Cassavetes loves stairs as like a point of drama going up and down, and particularly A Woman Under the
Stairs
Influence
movie
too
at the end.
And almost it's annoying how many times the kids go up and down those stairs.
Almost. I agree. Almost. It's funny that we were on this discussion specifically with Stanley Kubrick, because the book does a very good job at pointing out Cassavetes' philosophy that he feels that, like you said, that film is an actor's medium, and he felt that genuine emotion, the only things that were capable of expressing genuine emotion are people. He said that like whenever he saw a movie where like music tells you what to feel, or lights tell you what to feel, or an angle tells you what to feel, that he just hated it, that it was artifice, that it was human beings trying to recreate emotion rather than expressing it. So particularly he disliked a lot of Kubrick. This movie at the time, 74, 75 was when he was making it. And at the time, Clockwork Orange came out. And there's a bunch of interviews like during the making of this film where he goes like out of his way to shit on Clockwork Orange. Because there's one interview that I liked. He said it was nothing but nonsense. It was there's not a single character in that movie. And again, like that's what I think is the beauty of cinema, is that you have polar opposite people doing polar opposite things, but it's all great, it's all different, it's all unique. As long as there is a passionate person behind the film, I can excuse its shortcomings, and nobody was more passionate than fucking Cassavetes was.
Yeah. I just
for better or
worse reiterate that, like, even though I'm not always on board with Cassavetes films, I'm so happy he exists as a director.
Yeah.
And with his style and everything. A Woman Under the Influence, I mean, we're kind of like jumping all around his filmography. So I just want to wrap up our specific conversation on that and just say, yes, of course, this is one of the best movies ever made.
I agree. This time, I don't know what it was this time. This was technically my favorite Cassavetes movies before, but like I redid my favorite movies list. I shot this like straight to like top 20. I don't know what it was this time. I was just enthralled the whole time, all 2.5 hours of marital screaming. It was great.
I watched it with my mom, and she loved it.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah.
She did?
Yeah, I was surprised. I was very explicit in saying, this is going to be, she was like, is this a sad movie? I'm like, no, it's not a sad movie.
I don't think it is.
But it's not a happy movie. It's a very dramatic, like when you like dramatic, big D drama kind of film where stuff is happening. It's not necessarily, you're not feeling scared or frightened or sad or anything, but there is a lot of just kind of emotion and emotional tension between people. But she loved it, like really, really loved it. And I was very happy. And I gave her love streams and said, yeah, here, if you find it a night, that I'm gonna watch it.
Love streams.
She watched it. She liked love streams too.
Okay.
Not as much, but liked it.
I do feel that an important thing to mention here. Obviously, we talked about the acting, how it's great. Gena Rowlands it's one of my like favorite performances in this particular movie of all time. But I think what really helps is that Cassavetes loves actors and he loves characters. these two people, Gena Rowlands and Peter Falk, were some of his closest friends. So you could tell that he put so much time and care into getting these characters right, making sure that it was, as perfect as it could be. And again, there's a whole slew of Cassavetes regulars, but these two in particular are the ones that speak the fondest of him. And I learned a touching little sad thing the other day that Peter Falk died in 2011, but his grave is right next to John Cassavetes.
Now I'm going to tell you what the picture is about.
You know, Ben,
but this is not a
name?
simple film.
Peter, you
It's a
picked a bad
complicated
time because
film.
we have
It's
a
not a
message from our
palatable
local
film.
stations, and we'll be...
Oh, that's great.
Cute. And then I just think
That's
of
great.
like a spectral Mikey and Nikki walking around that graveyard.
The performances alone in this, both Peter Falk and Gena Rowlands, that's like, that alone is enough to make this one of the best movies ever made. That it's just, I don't think very few movies in the history of cinema have just gotten this devoted and dedicated to showing characters and their relationships and being honest about it. And that's, one of the reasons why this is like, I think the best expression of Cassavetes is that, whatever he was trying to get at with expressing love. And he was often very talking about love and the expression of that and exploring that theme in all of his films. And this is the one where he succeeded the most in saying something. Yeah. And, it's very much a film rooted in the culture of the 60s, 70s, early 70s. In like the marital roles, the role of the housewife, the role of the man,
father,
the worker,
yeah,
all that, and kind of we would call it the toxic masculinity plays a part in this, and kind of feminism to a certain degree. Interesting stories about how people originally reacted to the film, particularly the feminists who didn't like it, and then everyone else who just didn't like Cassavetes because this is weird directing style.
It's so funny what the history he has with critics, but yeah, it's that eternal question of condoning is not endorsing, and particularly Peter Falk was very saddened by the response to this movie because feminists saw that he was a bad guy in the movie, so they assumed that his character was badly written. But to the point where Cassavetes like stopped allowing Peter Falk to come to premieres because A, he didn't want the audience to like berate him, and two, he felt bad. He didn't want his friend to be hurt in that way.
The kind of gender roles that are on display in this film are sort of still applicable, but we've moved on generally from them. But I still think that there's a lot of applicability. There is a very universal core to this film, just about relationships, and it is one of the most subtly touching scenes of Cassavetes' career at the end, where not much is resolved.
No,
but they just come down from the high of everything that's going on and just go back to the routine of things and just start getting ready for bed together. And it's quiet, it's effective, kind of have like this quiet moment to just kind of think about everything that's happened. And it, Cassavetes said, and I agree with him, that it is a very subtly happy ending, sort of.
I think so too.
That that they're gonna keep on going. Like, it's not easy, but they are somehow, the film manages to express that they're kind of made for each other. That Peter Falk, that I think that's the really brilliant thing about Peter Falk's performance in here, is like he is dealing with so much, both his own anger and his own inability to deal with his role as the man of the house, but also being very intimately just in love with his wife. And you just have a moment to think about that, and then this wonderful kazoo music comes in at the end that is just perfect. It's absolutely wonderful. It's weird, kooky, charming, just like Gena Rowlands' character, just like Cassavetes' filmography. It's so unique. And
the guy too. There's a great interview on the Criterion with this guy who his name is Bo Hartwood. When Cassavetes met him, he only knew how to play the guitar. And there's some great guitar work. It's a subtle score. It only comes in a little bit, but it's a great score. And he's talking about like how for the intro scene, Cassavetes told him, "I want piano," and he gave him like a vague idea of a melody. The guy's like, "I don't know how to play a piano." And Cassavetes went and bought him a piano. He said, "Learn. We got some time. Learn how to play the piano." And then in the end, he gave him a kazoo. He just said, "I don't know how to play the kazoo, but put it in as well." But I do just want to like end this little this conversation here from a very telling part of the book that Cassavetes felt after A Woman Under the Influence that he had nothing left to say. He said that like as far as he was concerned, everything he had to say about like life in general was in the film's Faces, Husbands, and A Woman Under the Influence. Everything else, like before and after, he was just sort of like messing with things, but he felt like his most honest movies were those 3 movies, and he felt a tremendous sadness after A Woman Under the Influence came out, that he felt that he was spent, didn't know what else to do. But
and then he made more movies.
Then there's still some great fucking movies he made afterwards. But I do think this is his best. We're both on board saying BFI list.
Oh yeah, 100%. This is out of all of them, this is the one I'm most enthusiastic about. So we, quickly, we're not going to spend too much time going because I think we could talk for a very long time. Essentially, re-review every single Cassavetes film.
Yeah, we'll just touch on them.
I watched 5 in the past week. It was exhausting, but great.
I should also specify to listeners that I love Cassavetes. I love his movies. Watch one a month.
Yeah.
They are you'll hate him and yourself. Not that they're bad movies. They're a lot. You need time to digest, participation,
and to think, and to come to terms with your experience, good or bad.
Yes. But yes, I'm glad that you revisited some.
So we'll start at the beginning with Shadows.
Look, Tom, will you cool it? You know what you're talking about?
I suppose you really understand that thing, huh, Benny?
It's not a question of understanding it, man. If you feel it, you feel it, stupid. That's what I've been trying to tell you.
Ah, shut up, Dennis.
Shut up yourself.
It was my first foray into Cassavetes. It's an independent film. And this time around, having a better idea of Cassavetes as a director and his style and everything, the film, I'll say it clicked a bit more. Like I wouldn't say I love it or anything like that, but when Cassavetes calls it an experiment on his part, and I fully agree. It is kind of like a cinematic experience, an extreme low budget, actor driven film, and
no permits.
I just kind of appreciated more a lot of like the craft behind it, and I found it much less grating than I did the first time. Now that I'm more in tune, more kind of in sync here and there with what he's trying to accomplish. And it's interesting. It's kind of like, I feel like it was kind of like a Jackson Pollock painting of a Cassavetes film where you just kind of like threw characters and it's just scenes with all of them. And it's not going anywhere specifically, but that's kind of like the point. It's just a snapshot.
There's a charm
of trying to capture these characters that he created and that the actors are clearly invested in. And I think it works.
Yeah. It's a movie that's very inspiring because again, getting a movie made is very hard. Back then it was impossible. And the fact that he was able to do this independently, great. It's also pretty influential for being like just one of the earlier movies to like focus so much on like interracial romance and stuff like that. It was made during the civil rights era, and Cassavetes in general, like he said his obsessions, like every movie he's ever made has been about the relationship between men and women because he feels that is the only story worth telling. This one is obviously one of the more direct things of it. But yeah, I didn't revisit this one because when I saw it I wasn't that interested because again it felt like it was fun and it was there was passion behind it and the experiment was fun. But like you said, it never really went anywhere. Even the like more plotting Cassavetes movies, they go somewhere.
Yeah, but I think the difference here is that it doesn't overstay its welcome for me. Like other films, they don't necessarily go anywhere.
Yeah.
But this felt like it even in its meanderingness, even in its pointlessness, and I say that as a positive. It felt like it justified its runtime.
Yeah.
And that's all you really need to do, at least for me.
And again, the performances and the characters are so great that even though they don't do anything, it's fun to watch them. And that's all that matters for him.
Yeah.
A quick little anecdote about this was that Cassavetes is like sort of infamous for not knowing anything, technically. So he completely fucked up the audio when recording this. He just didn't know how to record it or whatever. A lot of it had to be reshot. And then after like months and months and months of trying his best to like salvage the audio, he finally got it like decently working or whatever. But before he got it decently working, he showed like an earlier version of it with like sort of messy, scratchy audio, and everyone loved it. And he's like, "Oh my god, okay. Just once I fix that, it'll be fine." And then he fixed it, and the audio is there. And then people liked it a lot less. And a lot of the critics were like, one of the best parts of this movie is its experimental use of audio. Cassavetes was like, "I was not experimenting with the audio. I just fucked it up."
Oh, that's great. So the next film in his filmography is Faces. This is one that I had never seen before.
This one. Yeah.
It's in the box set, the Criterion box set, and this was kind of like the last of the major Cassavetes, other than Minnie and Moskowitz, that I had yet to see. And it is great.
Do me a favor. Don't be silly anymore. Just be yourself.
But I am myself. Who else would I be?
I'm serious.
Definition of serious. Blah, blah, blah.
This is one of the upper tier Cassavetes. It occasionally, so I started the film and it has a really strong opening scene, and then it goes into I'll call it a classic Cassavetes scene, where it's characters very invested in their performance, and it's going nowhere.
We'll call it the bar singing scene.
And I was worried for a second. I was like, oh no, is this going to be another Cassavetes where I'm going to watch it, I'm going to be painfully bored, I'll return to it a couple months later, and I might like it a little more, but give and take, that whole process. And I was very happy to find at like the very next scene, as soon as the main characters, so it's about a husband and wife who have a what seems to be a very positive relationship together, suddenly break it off for one night of sorts, and they both kind of explore the alternatives, the outside world, other relationships, and then come together and realize it was really about the friends they made along the way.
This one's like heavy.
Yeah,
it's pretty.
As soon as the main guy comes home and starts that whole conversation with his wife at home, that eventually culminates with him saying, "I want a divorce," and then walks out. Excellent. I was fully on board with the film for the rest of the time. There are a few scenes here and there, moments where I could feel the pull of it's kind of like losing its track towards this kind of very strong central theme and idea. But it always kind of worked its way back, and it never became grating like something like Opening Night is for me.
Yeah. I love that one. Again, the beginning scene with the husband, Gena Rowlands, and the guy with the mustache. I love all that stuff. The wife was amazing in that movie, I thought. Whoever played the wife. I don't know any of the characters' names.
Yeah, she was really good.
She's amazing in that. My only problem with Faces is that Seymour Cassel is a weird looking dude. He really, he always he's got the Gene Hackman thing where he always looks 62. And the last half of this movie where the wife and her friends sort of hang around him, and he's sort of supposed to be like this young, sexy thing that brings some excitement into her life. And the whole time I'm just like, that's just Seymour Cassel. He's great in it, and he got an Oscar nom for it. But I'm like, really? You're gonna throw away your life for Seymour Cassel? Whatever. But like, yeah, when he brings them home and she does the suicide attempt, and again, we're talking about the stairs. Great stair scene in this one.
Great ending scene. 10 out of 10 ending scene. It's also kind of reminiscent of A Woman Under the Influence. Kind of repeats that sort of thematically at the end of that film.
Yeah, the thing about, because that's one that I saw last year when I had COVID for the second time, and that was like the first Cassavetes movie where I was just wowed immediately. So I've been hesitant to return to it. I feel like I can only like it more, but that's like the one that got me really interested and wanted me to watch more. And the thing about Cassavetes movies in general is that I can never remember certain, like, obviously there are scenes I remember, but it's hard for me to recollect them. But one thing that, again, he always nails is I could give you like a whole page description of just about every character that gets more than a minute screen time, because you feel everything about these characters and the performances. And that one in particular, I specifically remember the husband-wife dynamic, and I think he nailed that one.
It's also, I think, probably the best example of, if you want to show young aspiring filmmakers, the best example of independent filmmaking. And that's very much what inspired a lot of that movement later on. Yeah. And the fact that he filmed it in his own house over a couple years, raised the money for it himself. And it is, there's only a couple scenes in the whole thing, but it is a very good demonstration of how, as long as you get the character right, like, I think where Cassavetes has a point is that in order to start making good movies, you don't need budget, you don't need special effects, you don't need crazy visuals and cinematography, although that is very much a important part of filmmaking. Yeah. You do just need get the acting and the characters right. Start there. Like, you need, that's the base, that's the foundation of everything. And it's a good example of that. How it's very rough around the edges. It's just people sitting in a living room, people, just actors interacting. People.
They all have interesting faces.
Limited locations. Well, not ironically. I think that's
true. This one, one last thing is that, like, this one, it looks really good, but there's something about that particular graininess. I think it was 16 millimeter.
The very grainy.
It's very grainy to the point where
soft.
It put me off for a little bit, because you just see the cover on the 5-piece box set, and I'm just like, that looks hard to watch, but it's good. Next one.
One last thing. Great line in the film. The wife says, "Let's go watch a movie. Let's watch a Bergman film." And then the husband says, "I don't feel like getting depressed tonight."
It's important to note that Cassavetes did love Bergman. But yeah, the next one, which I'm excited to talk about, is Husbands. The husband's pseudo redemption arc.
We both weren't keen on Husbands first watching. In fact, I think I liked it more than you did.
You did. I really did not like it. I listened to that episode the other day. I really did not like it.
It's good.
I would go as far as to say great. I was genuinely surprised how much more I liked it this time. I still think there are some parts that I'm like, move on.
Terrible. Unreal. No passion. One more time.
Yeah, there's some scenes in here where it's definitely, because there's a difference between a scene that I like watching, but I feel like, okay, you could move on, and versus a scene where, like, you need to move on. You need to cut some of this. And there's the scene early on when they're all drinking and singing.
It's so long.
But I was there for the scene this time around. I was like, it could have been cut, probably should have been cut, trimmed, but I didn't mind it.
Yeah.
However, later on in the movie, this time around, I found myself really just not involved with the London side of the film, and everything in the beginning was great. Like, it was on track to be a 5 out of 5 Cassavetes film. But then it just, like, it hit a wall somewhere there, and it's partially just how I'm feeling about the film, because I think that's kind of inherent to a lot of Cassavetes viewings. You're not supposed to love it every time. It's what you bring to the table and how you interact with it. But there's very specifically, if I were to ever point to a scene, Cassavetes filmography, it's with himself, Cassavetes, and the woman he hooks up with. And it's just like 10 minutes of them just nonsense, laughing and doing nothing particularly sexy or anything, but they're in bed and they're just fooling around, and it got annoying.
Lie down?
Yes. Look.
Lie down.
Yes, lie down.
All right, I will.
Quick. Stop. Jesus.
See, for me, that one was the I don't know. It was more the bar thing for me. The bar thing towards like the last 2 or 3 minutes of the bar thing, I'm like, hurry up. When it's just the girl trying to sing the same song over and over again. They use real beer too, which is kind of funny.
Well, you can see you can see where Cassavetes what was it, his ulcer or whatever killed him from the alcohol.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole other story. But
I think he downs a glass of beer faster than I think I've seen most people ever down a glass of beer. It's impressive.
But the thing that saves that scene for me is I love the scene of them in the bathroom.
Did we improvise the film?
I don't.
Is that
That's the question.
Yeah. Well, may I say?
You wait for Peter. Well, I want to tell you why the film may seem long sometimes.
The film seems long to me, and I haven't seen it yet. Yes.
You got to wait for Peter. Wait.
Yeah.
Wait. Peter, come up with something.
What did you say?
I'll give you one idea.
When Ben Gazzara walks off, and then he tries to get back in, and they're just violently throwing up. It's fun. Yeah, the London stuff for me, it's hit or miss. That stuff you're talking about, I like half of it, so it's fine. But then it's one of those things where like every time I'm about to be like, oh, hurry up, there's a scene that comes that I love. Because like right after that, you get Peter Falk chasing the Chinese girl in the rain.
That's great. Yeah, it course corrects in the last.
Yeah, and the ending is just amazing. I love that ending.
I don't know why. Like it's such a innocuous moment, but Peter Falk and Cassavetes, when they get home from the trip, and Peter Falk's going through these giant paper bags of toys and presents they've gotten. Like you'd think they would have done that organized and figure out all before, but he's just rummaging and they're like half falling out of their arms. It's great. It's fun. You can tell
it's
they're
so funny because like towards the end of the London thing, you could tell that like they have no idea how the fuck they're gonna explain this to their wives. So their immediate thought is, as soon as we land, buy all the shit that we can, and just completely plug up this absence with toys. And it's just it's so funny.
Next, killing of a Chinese bookie.
His name is Ling.
What does he do?
Well, he's a bookie. Chinese bookie. See, what we need you for is this. We got this little problem.
I am now more convinced that I watched the director's cut originally.
The shorter one.
Yeah, the shorter one.
Yeah, me too. Because which one did you watch? The longer one this time?
No, director's cut.
Same.
Why watch something that Cassavetes didn't disown, but said he likes this one more? So, we're here for him as a director, so might as well see what he wanted to express. And I think this is possibly his best paced film.
Well, yes, I agree.
And there are moments where, there's not an old adage, but you'll hear it on almost every major screenwriting channel or like movie analysis channel today about, eventually they'll talk about how, good scene construction, you build up to the point, and as soon as the point is made, you cut to the next scene. And that is antithetical to Cassavetes as a director, except he does it a few times in this film, and I'm like, oh my god, you did a cut that works for the pacing and is interesting. Like you're cutting from one scene and one scenario a little early before it finishes to another scenario that's related thematically or with the action.
It's also under really 2 hours.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Yeah, it's funny because going through all these movies, I'm like, okay, there's like a clean 90-minute runtime. That's a runtime. 2-hour runtime. That's a runtime. The Cassavetes runtime is 220. But yeah, this one. Oh no, go ahead.
No, there's like a scene or two in here where I felt my interest waning a little bit, but for the most part, this is I think, other than A Woman Under the Influence, it's the Cassavetes that I can get on board with the most consistently in terms of just it being into a film in the most casual sense.
This one I really, really like. It's tied for Love Streams as my second favorite. This is the one that actually got me interested in Cassavetes, not just because he did it for the podcast, but because PTA is a big fan of this movie. Specifically, how there's a lot of like visual things that he took from this in Inherent Vice. But this one, there's a very interesting anecdote, which this becomes kind of a theme in Cassavetes movies where the actors don't know what's going on. They know the character, but they're like, what is this about? Peter Falk in Husbands was just wanted to kill Cassavetes the whole time. Because he, from scene to scene, he's like, who am I? What am I doing here? What is going on? And he would never tell him. He would tell him an emotion. He wouldn't tell him anything else. This one, Ben Gazzara, in like the first 2 or 3 days of shooting, he eventually had to pull Cassavetes aside, just saying that like, what is my character? What am I doing? What he's a gambler, but he's a strip club owner, but he's a sleazeball, but he cares. And he said that like it was the one time that Cassavetes ever gave like a concrete motivation. He basically said that like, you are playing an artist, and these gamblers, these loan sharks, these are the people who are trying to take down your art. For them, it's all about the money. They don't see what you're doing here. They don't see what it means to you. They don't see what it means to everyone else. All they care about is the money and what this means for them financially. And Ben Gazzara was just like, oh, this is not a movie about a strip club owner. It's weirdly, because it's like a genre movie, which is not what he does at all. But then when you like hear that, you get it.
I love how also the very funny interview where he almost gets upset, like personally upset that the interviewer, French guy, I believe, calls it a genre film, a gangster film. I just love how Cassavetes like, well, it is like it. Yes, of course it is, but it isn't. How dare you insinuate that I made a genre film?
You were. I mean, when you see Faces or Husbands, they don't refer to any specific genre. But here, obviously, a man who is a gambler, who has a striptease, place, and who loses money, gets into the mafia, who ask him to kill somebody, and so on. It's plot that we have seen. But this is not a criticism, but it's something that we have seen as a starting point. Whereas the other films that you did were, so I think it belongs to the genre in terms of reference. Obviously.
I'm going to cry because that isn't really. Obviously that is true.
I just love how proud Ben Gazzara's character is when he goes on stage or announces it as like, oh, I directed all of these things, and then you watch them and you're like, who's finding this interesting? It's
so funny because he's doing it just for himself.
Yeah, he
like,
loves.
None of it's good.
He loves what he does, and he's very passionate about it. But what he's doing is. It's almost insane in a good way. In a very like single-minded, focus-driven, and it's charming how awful some of the actual the direction of the strip tease acts.
You anything but love, baby.
Excuse me, sir, but I'm new here.
She certainly is.
Well, obviously there's the meta-ness of relating this movie to Cassavetes' career, but there's also like a meta-ness of the stripping is sort of like a metaphor for film and gangster films in particular. People show up to a gangster film because they want to see like crimes, killings, shady things, just like the people showing up to the strip club want to see breasts. They want to see nudity. But instead you have Mr. Sophistication. And then they pull off their tops when they're getting alienated. It's like it's a movie that has a lot of layers to me, and I like it more each time. But my favorite scene of the whole thing is when he's on his way to do the titular killing of the Chinese boogie, and his car breaks down, and he runs to the phone booth, and the first thing he does is he calls the club and he wants to know how the show's going.
I just love when he's asking for the hamburgers. He says, no, I don't want them individually wrapped. I just want a bunch of hamburgers in a bag. And the waitress just can't fathom that request.
Yeah, it's good. I love this movie. I just want to reiterate, I still wouldn't put any of these on the BFI list. I still think Only a Woman Under the Influence deserves to be on them, but I love these movies a lot more now. So the next one, I guess, would be we just talked briefly about Opening Night. I know you didn't have the stomach to watch it again, but I did.
Just
Please tell me what this play doesn't express.
Hope?
All right, we'll pick this up later.
Watch it again. I understand why you hate it, because there's so much of this movie where it's just a camera pointed at a stage. But there's a lot going on between these scenes. I think this is Gena Rowlands' second best performance, and I was surprised again at how much more I enjoyed it a second time.
I will eventually. I will go back in with an open mind towards opening night. I am now going to draw a parallel between Star Wars and John Cassavetes, and that these are two film franchises, if you want to call Cassavetes' filmography
this Cassavetes cinematic universe.
That I often get burned by. I don't necessarily like watching some of these, some of the Star Wars movies or some of the Cassavetes movies, but I can't help myself. I always return to them. And so I will always return, even though opening night is by far my least favorite of the whole bunch. I do genuinely think it is a terrible film, not well made. We had a conversation about this, so I won't bother justifying it. That's just my summary.
Yeah, no.
I would much rather like it eventually, so I will return to it. I'm Cassavetes out for the time being, so it won't be anytime soon. But
the one last thing about opening night I do want to say is that the part that I don't like the most, which is the seance and the whole connecting with the spirit of the dead girl, Cassavetes himself said, like, in the editing process, he's like, why the fuck did I do this? So just know that your disdain is slightly shared. Last two I want to get to real quick. Love Streams, which is, it's again, we're talking about this whole idea of Cassavetes not wanting to embrace the cinematic language, and I do find it interesting that in this one he kind of does. It's very un-Cassavetes in the sense that there's like weird dream atmosphere stuff. There's like this ballet opera thing, stage play that looks amazing. He's playing with color a lot more than he usually does. It's a stylistic outlier in a visual sense, but still the core of it is very much on brand. But it's a very interesting movie. It's one of his higher rated ones, especially on Letterboxd. If you look at the ratings, it's kind of crazy. But like I said, it flip-flops between this and Bookie is my second favorite, but I just love the Cassavetes movies he's in because I find him to be a very funny actor.
He is a fun actor. He's a good part of any of the movies he's in. I do like him in Opening Night. I do like Gena Rowlands.
He's an asshole in Opening Night. He's great in Opening Night.
Yeah.
Oh, also
Love Streams is good. I didn't rewatch it, and I'm not sure I have enough experience with it to really comment. But I liked it.
There's one scene in particular I love, which is just him laughing in a room during a rainstorm. He just laughs like a madman. And he looks at, there's just a big hairy guy sitting there, and he's just like, "Who the fuck are you?"
Who the fuck are you?
What are you doing here? And then it cuts back to it's just a dog. I don't know why. I watch that scene at least twice a week. I love it so much. It's great. One quick thing about Opening Night. Peter Falk's in it for like 3 seconds. He's an extra. It's weird. But last one I want to talk about, and again, I know it's been a while since you've seen this too. It's not even a Cassavetes movie. Mikey and Nikki, which...
Yes, of course. I mean, it's got Peter Falk in it. It's got John Cassavetes. So it's a Cassavetes adjacent product.
It's very much, it feels like a Cassavetes movie. I don't want to like belittle Elaine May because she's the reason this movie is perfect. But it feels very influenced. And again, just this, I find their relationship so touching. Elaine May wrote this script with John Cassavetes and Peter Falk in mind. She knew Peter Falk really well. Peter Falk knew Cassavetes really well.
You know. Do you want to talk about art, Dick?
Art. Or Dick, we could talk about.
So Elaine May came to Peter Falk with this script saying, like, could you convince John to do it? And he's like, oh, I don't know. He doesn't like this sort of thing. It's like a genre thing or whatever. So he arranges a meeting with John Cassavetes. And he tells him, like, there's this movie I want to do with you. And Cassavetes stops right there. He's like, I'm in. He just wanted to work with Peter Falk. He just was like, I would love to do a movie with you.
It's definitely a movie I need to return to very, very soon. Because
I feel
I will be making my way through Columbo that I started watching. Watched the first episode last night. A lot of fun. And it's, I think, one of the early episodes of season 2. It's Cassavetes is an actor on Columbo. And when I get to that episode, maybe I'll do a double pairing that evening with Mikey and Nikki.
I think you'll like it just because it's Peter Falk. And the reason I love it, besides the fact that these two are just hilarious, is that there's a lot of Sopranos in Mikey and Nikki. So won't go into it, but that would be the only other one I'd say could put in the BFI list, because that's just also in my top 30, one of my favorite movies. Masterpiece. But yeah, I think that does it.
You start thinking about life and you realize that everything is a movie.
Get excited. I'm getting excited. That's the only way to live. In the long run, you lose.
So much to unpack with Cassavetes as a filmmaker, as his philosophy, like reading through this little booklet and then like watching the interviews with Cassavetes. I found like points where it was like, this is inspiring. I found other points where it was like, I disagree. Other points was like, wow, I never thought of that before. So you're really going through a whole like slew of emotions. And I think it is required, if you want to be a filmmaker, a director, a writer, it is required to interact with Cassavetes just to know that this is an option, that the way to approach character and film, that this is out there, and to let that influence, some of your more, I hate to say conventional, but more conventional plotting, because it can, it is applicable, regardless of how out there, how fanatical, how radical Cassavetes was. There's something to learn. And it's definitely within his characters and the way he worked with actors, and it's great stuff. Glad I have warmed up to him.
I would, after all that we've been through with this man, I would now put him in like my top 5 favorite directors, even if though I would only count one of his movies as being one of my favorites. His spirit, his independent spirit is greatly inspiring. He's a very eccentric man. He's frustrating, but overall I think he's very lovable. And I think that's what people who worked with him would tell you too. He's very frustrating, but you can't not love him.
All right. That was John Cassavetes. I'm sure he'll come up on the podcast again.
Yeah.
I mean, how could he not? Oh, here's a question. Last thing before we go, because I have no idea what we're going to do next time, so we're not going to bother figuring that out here and now. But here's the question. Out of the movies you've seen in the past couple of years, new releases, movies from like 2019, 2020, whatever, what film do you think Cassavetes would actually like?
Marriage Story.
Interesting.
Marriage Story. I think he'd love Uncut. No, maybe I don't know. There's a movie called Private Life that I think he would love.
I might point to, if we're staying on like the Marriage Story, the Noah Baumbach, I might actually point towards the Meyerowitz stories as one that Cassavetes would like.
No Baumbach in general.
I don't know. I know for a fact Cassavetes would hate most of the things that came out. Like, not hate, but just not care to interact with it at all. Especially Marvel films.
Well, it's surprising. His favorite director was Frank Capra.
Well, that's okay, because he was grandfathered in. Because I got the sense that Cassavetes liked like the history of cinema and going back and seeing where it came from. He didn't so much care for that same style, but contemporary.
Yeah.
The fact that it was older is the point, not that what it was.
I'm really going to have to sit on this one. I'll have a better answer next time.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because he did hate most things.
All right, well, that's Cassavetes. We should probably pick another director to do this with, to kind of focus in on eventually. Maybe one that's kind of driven by the BFI list at some point.
I feel like we were very close to doing that with Mike Lee. We sort of unofficially did it.
It's hard to, because he has so many movies and there's so much to really.
It's interesting
there.
The guy who wrote the film the book on Cassavetes, he only did 2 books. He's a famous film critic. He only did 2 books. One on Cassavetes, one on Mike Lee.
Oh, we for the longest time we just agreed this was just going to be the Cassavetes episode. We weren't going to pair it with any A Woman Under the Influence with anything. Although now I am personally recommending that anyone who watches A Woman Under the Influence who's looking for a double feature should watch A Woman Under the Influence, and then you should watch Pedro Almodovar's Woman on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown. 1, 2 titles go together great, and 2, they are like the exact opposite films, both centered around women and relationships. Though I recommend that to you. The other one, it's like a comedy, a neurotic comedy that's just going a mile a minute, just everywhere.
That's interesting because I was reading through a bunch of reviews of opening night, and they said that like a huge movie that like almost remade it essentially was Pedro Almodovar's All About My Mother.
Oh yeah, I mean, I a lot of directors love Cassavetes, so that doesn't surprise me. Haven't seen it.
Oh, one of his other favorite movies, Cassavetes, was All About Eve, which should be shocking to no one.
Anyway, all right. So that was John Cassavetes. Thanks for tuning in. Let us know if you like Cassavetes, if you've seen his movies, all that kind of stuff. Like, comment, subscribe. I may be taking a bit of a
hit the bell.
Hit the bell. God damn it! Like us. Like the podcast. Do it.
Subscribe. I already said that.
Anyway, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.
Where's Sammy? God, where is he?
Good going, Sammy.
Cut.
Good going, Sammy.
Okay, that's it. Gentlemen, that is a wrap.